Hello, boys and girls, and welcome to another edition of Movie Goodness, where we examine life through cinema here on the KB Radio Network. I am your host, Kevin Reed, and welcome to the month of October 2023. And, October has slick style become an entire month of Halloween. Halloween is, you know, the very last day of this month, and it's always been that since Halloween's been around. But it's something about the month of October that has taken on uh, just this whole holiday feel of Halloween. Full of horror, full of scares and all this other stuff. I've actually seen people in my neighborhood and in other neighborhoods who have put up Halloween decorations since last month. I've been seeing the skeletons and the ghosts and the tombstones in the yard. I've been seeing this for a few weeks now, and it's just the first week of October. So people have been gearing up for Halloween. And I'm not a big Halloween guy. I'm never been the dress up and bring the kids trick or treating guy. I've when my kids were little, they went trick or treating maybe twice, and that was it for them. They didn't want to trick or treat. And when I was younger, I vaguely remember trick or treating. I think I went when I was younger, of course, but I may have went 2 or 3 times. At least that I can remember. I don't remember going trick or treat. It just never been my thing. It has nothing to do with the religious upbringing that I had. I mean, I'm pretty sure that played a little part in it, but that wasn't it. It wasn't like I was banned from it. But it was just I just didn't get into it. And when I got older, when I got kids myself, I didn't neglect them from it. Even though I wasn't into it, they could get into it, but they didn't get into it. So it is what it is. But what I do love about Halloween, one of my favorite things, no, it's not the candy. It's not the haunted houses. It's the horror. I am a huge horror nut. I love horror movies. I love genre movies. That is my bag. I can watch horror year round. It's not just relegated to the month of October or around Halloween. I love horror. I can watch it on New Year's Eve. I can watch it on Christmas Day. It doesn't matter. I love horror. So I decided this year on Movie Goodness for the month of October, all 4 episodes that will be released this month will be centered around horror. And so we're gonna do horror. Unless something pops up that's big, major, that we need to talk about, that we need to discuss, we'll discuss it. And probably still throw in some horror. But this month we're dedicating to the horror genre. And it was like fate that today, at least the day we're releasing this episode on October the 6th, which is my wife's birthday, by the way. Happy birthday, babe. We're getting a release of a film in theaters that is a sequel to a 50-year-old movie. Now, they've had sequels and television shows and stuff in between all that, but this is supposed to be a direct sequel to the original film. And so it's fitting. It's ironic. It may even be fate that today we're going to celebrate the 50-year anniversary of what many people consider the greatest horror film of all time, the 1973 horror classic, The Exorcist, a film that I was banned from watching when I was younger. I got away with watching a lot of movies back in the old days. I could sneak and watch horror films. I snuck and watched, Friday the 13th and uh Nightmare on Elm Street and films like that. Rated R movies. I always watched them. I wasn't supposed to, but I did. But this film had a lifetime ban at my house. It was no way I could watch this movie. Now when we got HBO, it did come on. I tried to sneak and watch it. I watched bits and pieces of it, but ironically, the bits and pieces of it that I watched didn't involve the actual exorcism part of it. So I was wondering what the big hoopla was about the movie. So I never really got around to watch it until I was, I don't know, 12, 13, something like that. I don't know. When I had enough courage to finally watch it and not be caught. And so I finally watched the movie and I got it. I understood, but around that time, like I said, I've seen the Friday the 13th films and all those other horror films, and it didn't have the same impact per se, it horrorized, but I got it. I understood. And we're going to go over why I understood the cult status that this movie has, the classic title that it has, the reason it was nominated for Academy Awards like it was. And so we're, of course, going to review The Exorcist. But before we get to that review, let's talk about the production, because that's a movie within itself. Actually, the story of how this movie got made was probably more entertaining than the actual movie, with the directing style of William Franklin, who passed away a few months ago, and the casting and the curse that was on this production, if you will. And so we're going to go through all that I have researched concerning The Exorcist in honor of the 50 years that this movie has been in the pop culture zeitgeist. It was released, ironically, on Christmas Day of 1976, which is like the craziest release date for this type of film. A day that signifies the birth of Jesus Christ. We're going to have a film that deals with demonic possessions. But hey, it worked out for Warner Brothers. When it comes to horror movies, everybody has something different that scares them. Maybe it's something like evil dolls, like Chucky or Annabelle, or it could be ghosts, or it even possessed children. There are already decades worth of horror movies, but filmmakers decide to pump out flicks that make people spine tingle in a way that is not a good tingle. It's not the tickle me Elmo tingle. Even though people are scared by different elements in horror movies, many people agree that The Exorcist is one of the scariest movies ever made. The Exorcist focus on a girl named Regan McNeil who is possessed by a demon and whose only hope is in the hands of an exorcist and a priest. The movie is directed by William Friedkin and it stars Linda Blair as Regan. There's 5 films in the Exorcist series, which also includes a TV show that came out on, I think it was Fox that had that show back in 2016. Blair returned for the first sequel, Exorcist 2, The Heretic, which was horrible. Despite the multiple movies that deal with exorcisms, The Exorcist will always be considered one of the best. Even after 50 years, The Exorcist can still give people the creeps. Not all old horror films can live up after 50 years, but The Exorcist truly does. Even though the movie itself is extremely frightening, some of the behind the scenes secrets and information about the filmmaking process is even more frightening. Let's go through some of the behind the scenes of the making of The Exorcist. This is some crazy stuff, and some of the things you probably have heard, you know, probably done heard them all. Who knows? After 50 years, I'm pretty sure you probably didn't heard them. But some of the stuff I didn't even realize was going on. I was like, man, really? How did this movie get made? How did they finish this movie? And how did they complete it? How? And how was it so successful? And how does it still hold up after all these years? It's amazing. But you know, it is what it is. Let's start off with our first bit of news about the making of The Exorcist. Number one, an actual priest was asked to bless the set after it caught on fire. The set caught on fire. There were many creepy occurrences that took place during the filming of The Exorcist. Many people were led to believe that the set was haunted, especially after the entire, not just one set or a couple of props or whatever, the entire set caught on fire. The set that was being used for the McNeil house caught fire, which delayed the production for 6 weeks. Now, that's not uncommon. There's accidents on sets. There are things that happen, that they may throw off a production. But that wasn't the strange part. That wasn't the reason why he brought the priest in to bless the set. What's strange is that the only room that wasn't burnt up was Reagan's demonic bedroom, where she's, where the bed, where she's strapped to the bed, and where most of the exorcism takes place. That room was untouched, but the entire set surrounding it burnt up. I can't make this up, people. Due to that fact, a priest was asked to come in and bless the set in order to keep the cast and the crew at ease. I'm gonna tell you, if I was working on that set, this is how I would have been at ease. I quit. That's it. I take the hint. I take it. I get it. I'm out of here. The number two little behind the scenes thing, which ain't really behind the scenes, but I thought this was interesting. Of course, this film is older than me. I'm only 44 years old. This movie is 50 years old. But the number two thing was that when the movie was released, some theaters had to hand out vomit bags to the audience to watch the movie. Now, many movies are marketed as being a true frightening experience, but not very many movies have had the power to make people physically ill. Now, I did get sick, when I watched Cloverfield, when I went to the theater to watch Cloverfield. And that was because of the shaky cam element of it all. I got vertigo or whatever. I got nauseous. And I had to walk out the theater for a minute and come back in. But that was because of the shaky cam. No, this was different. When The Exorcist hit theaters, many of the theaters handed out vomit bags because people kept throwing up in the auditoriums. Many people were repulsed by what they had saw on the big screen due to the film's horrific and graphic content. Because this was very graphic and very disgusting at the same time. And I can understand, I can see it, especially if you're sitting there, you're eating your popcorn and all this here, and all of a sudden you see this little girl throw up gallons of this green goo, masturbating with a cross. Yeah, it would make you want to throw up. And so I get it. But for the theaters to go the extra mile to do this, is crazy to me. There are many claims that people even passed out along with vomiting and eventually left the theater because the film was too much to handle. There are some truly horrifying horror movies that has came out in recent years, but none had quite of an impact that The Exorcist did. You know, I wish I was alive during that time, just to experience that. You know, I don't know. I'm just a sick minded person, but I would love to see people go through all that. It was. I can imagine. I can imagine. I don't think I would have walked out or anything. I, you know, I would have been like, oh my god, I know this feels wrong watching because that's how I felt. That's how I felt the other day when I rewatched it for this review. I was like, man, this don't feel right. But it was so good. But in any event, yeah, people were handed out bags for vomit, and people were passing out and everything else because of this film. Our next note of the behind the scenes of the making of this film, Linda Blair, who plays Reagan in the film, got bodyguards after the movie was released. Um, there are plenty of examples of movies that have been deemed offensive to many people. Any film that has to do with religion typically has to be careful with the way they present certain ideas concerning religious beliefs. Just to give you an example, uh, hey, the Passion of the Christ, right? The Passion of the Christ is about Jesus, but that is such a controversial movie. That is a movie that even the most starch church growing Christian human being can find fault in that movie and feel offended by that movie. The Last Temptation of Christ, which was directed by Martin Scorsese and it starred William Dafoe as Jesus. I never watched that movie, um, but I can see where people could get offended by it. I know what the movie's about, but I just never sat down and watched it. And I get it. You know, it's a slippery slope there, but everything offends everybody these days. I would say this, The Exorcist, and you're probably going to hear me say this again throughout this show, probably a couple of more times throughout this show. Today, The Exorcist would not be made. I know that The Exorcist Believer is coming out, well, today, might as well say. But this particular film, this movie, would not be made today. I I don't see it. Not in today's climate. It would not be made. But in the case of The Exorcist, there are several let's say sacrilegious acts performed since this film centered around a girl who is being possessed by a demon. You know, some people who saw The Exorcist were so offended that they were send death threats to this 12-year-old actress, you know, for portraying this character. Since people thought the film glorified Satan, Linda Blair had to get bodyguards with her at all times for 6 months after Warner Brothers released the film in December of 1973. And I'll say I've watched the movie several times. I watched it as a young man, I watched it as a grown adult, and in between. I have never picked up on glorifying Satan out of this movie. At no point. At no point. I think people just, I don't know. I don't know how to explain it. But to send death threats to a 12-year-old girl is kind of hypocritical, don't you think? You know, I mean, you talk about glorifying Satan and evilness and all this. What do you think that is? It's kind of, it's crazy to me. I don't know. Maybe I'm looking at it wrong. But yeah. Poor Linda Blair had to get bodyguards to escort her everywhere for 6 months after the release of this film. All right. Our next note of the behind the scenes is many people linked to this movie met a tragic end. And I mean tragic. You know, it weren't just natural deaths after this. It was tragic stuff. While it doesn't happen all the time, Some cast and crew members do pass away while making a movie. That's not uncommon. What's strange about The Exorcist is that a total of 9 people passed away that is said to be linked to this movie. Actors Jack McGowan, who plays the director, who plays Burke in the film, he passed away after filming commenced after the set fire. He passed away. And the actress who plays Damien's mother, she passed away both before the film ended. The ironic twist to it, weird, fate, cursed, haunted, whatever, however you want to label it. Both of their characters in the movie die in the movie. that I'm telling you, the behind the scenes is crazier than the movie. Also, Linda Blair's grandfather, Max Van Sito's brother, a night watchman, a special effects expert, also lost their lives during or after the production of this film. Now, look, I know there's coincidence. I know there's a such thing as, oh, that's a coincidence. Come on. Come on. That is freaky, man. That is crazy. That all these people died who was linked to this movie. I mean, Max Van Sito's brother wasn't even in the film. You know, Linda Blair's grandfather wasn't even in the film. You know, but they're linked to this film. So I'm sending a memo out to all my peeps. Do not, I repeat, do not get involved with the production of The Exorcist in any shape, form, or fashion. Please. Yeah, man, that is crazy. Our next behind the scenes note, it was based on a true story. Now, if horror movies aren't scary enough, to slap that based on a true story label on it, that's enough to make you want to crawl under a bed and just live there forever. You know, it adds a whole new level of fear to a film. You know, while the movie is based on William Peter Blatty's book called The Exorcist, both the book and the movie is inspired by the story of a teenager with the pseudonym Roland Doe. The exorcism of Doe is said to have taken weeks to perform in a home in Missouri in 1949. During that exorcism, the devil's face apparently appeared on the boy's leg before the voice of Saint Michael came out of the boy's mouth, telling Satan to leave the boy's body. Now, depending on what your belief system is, you could take that and run with it, or you could say that was some form of mental illness or whatever. I don't know, but I do know this: whether you're a believer or a skeptic, you cannot fake. You can't fake the appearances of faces coming out of your body. So I'll just leave it there. Our next note. The scene when Ellen Burstyn hits the floor or hits part of the wall. No, she hit the floor and she screams in pain. You like, man, boy, she is acting her behind off. Those were real screams of pain. And it made it into the movie. Just as audiences were screaming when they watched The Exorcist, the characters in the movie were screaming as well. After all, Reagan herself was being possessed, and her mother, Chris, had to watch as a demon took over her daughter's body. In the scene when Reagan mutilates herself with a cross, her mother rushes over to stop her, but is shoved onto the floor by the demon inside of Reagan. The stuntman had pulled the wire rig to the actress harder than expected, and it caused Burstyn to severely hurt her back, you know, when she hit the floor, leading to permanent spine injury. She still has that to this day. 50 years later, she still has back troubles because of that scene, that one little scene. And see how it all came to be. Ellen Burstyn had told the stuntman, look, don't pull too hard. Don't pull too hard. I'm gonna hit the floor. And I'm gonna do my scream and blah blah blah. But William Franklin, he felt the need to, to get some realism, and there's a lot of that he did in this film that we're gonna go over. But he secretly told the stuntman, just yank it hard. So he yanked it, and when she hit the floor, she hit it, boy. You could tell in the film, it's very authentic. I mean, that scream was real. And so, if you ever wondered how she mustered up that strength to give that blood curdling performance, that was real. So when you go back and watch the film, it's gonna have a different taste to it. Speaking of the director, our next note, and Ellen Burstyn called William Friken a maniac. It's no surprise that making a movie look as real as The Exorcist was a grueling task, because of this, director William Friken had some rather intense directing techniques. In the documentary that came out in 2010, the Blu-ray edition of The Exorcist, it was revealed that the director often fired guns and slapped actors in the face right before the camera started rolling. The dude was crazy, bro. I mean, he really wanted to get those. I mean, if you look at the finished product, you're like, boy, this is some awesome A+ acting going on right here. But no, they looked like that because they wanted to kill their director. So it makes sense. I guess, I mean, he wanted to get the best performance possible. Now, you don't have to do all that. You have to trust your actors to give the best performance, and they can only do as much as you can do. You can't push actors there. Actually, now you can't do that. There's, there are rules and regulations. You can't touch nobody and stuff like that. So, the man did what he had to do, I guess. But to sit there and be reciting your lines and you hear a shotgun go off, just to get a scare, just to get a jump, and stuff like, it's not that serious, dude. It's really not that serious. But R.I.P. to William Friken. He is an awesome filmmaker. Well, at least he was. I'm sorry. But he was crazy. Our next note. Mercedes McCambridge voiced the demon and later experienced a tragedy herself. Now, they tried with Linda Blair to get this voice out. While Linda Blair gave an incredible performance at the age of 14. She was 14, actually, playing a 12-year-old. But the voice of the demon was actually done by a radio and film actress, Mercedes McCambridge. The actress added a startling dimension to the movie by supplying a chilling voice that you would never imagine coming from this little girl. And you wouldn't imagine it coming from Mercedes McCambridge. When you see a picture of her, you're gonna be like, that came out of her. How that came out of her? Well, according to Friken, he once said in the interview that the actress swallowed raw eggs, smoked cigarettes, and drank alcohol in order to achieve the voice of the demon. That's dedication, people. That's dedication that I wish I had. And that is just for a voice. The raw eggs. Smoking cigarettes and drinking. Yeah, okay, I might could do that. But the raw eggs? Nah. What's even more interesting is that McCambridge even gave up her sobriety to make the voice seem more authentic as possible. She was a soul. She went through sobriety, but in order to achieve this, to get this job, to do this job justice, she broke it. In 1987, she was also faced with a tragedy when her son ended the life of his wife, his children, and himself. Jesus. The man killed his entire family, then turned the gun on himself. My God. All because she broke sobriety. Anyways, I don't know that's the reason, but that was so sad and crazy at the same time. Our other note, the set was refrigerated. It's safe to say that the cast and crew working on The Exorcist was incredibly uncomfortable. One way that William Friedkin made life difficult for the cast and crew was by refrigerating the entire set. Now, what does that mean? This allows viewers to see the breath of Reagan and the priest and add an eerie effect to the film. You ever watched it and wondered how they got the temperature in that room so low that you see the breath coming out when they talk? Well, that's how. See, now, these days, that would all be digital. They would just add digital breath. But in 1973, we didn't have industrial light and magic. So they had to do it the hard way and refrigerate the entire set. Now, the downside to that, when you have the priests, they were able to dress for the occasion. They could wear extra layers under their clothes. Well, Linda Blair wasn't blessed with that luxury. You know, she was in a nightgown. So she had to lay there in a nightgown, nothing over her, in this basically a freezer this entire time, you know, during filming. My God, that was brutal. That is brutal. That is brutal. And she did it. God bless her. She did it. Our other note, the original teaser trailer for The Exorcist was banned in theaters. Banned. They wouldn't even show them. Didn't have YouTube back then, so you couldn't pull it up there. The Exorcist has been scaring audiences for years, but the scares first started with the teaser trailer that was released for the movie. The teaser consisted of the iconic scene with Father Merrin getting out of the cab, followed by flashes of a white-faced demon and this demonic Reagan. So the trailer seemed fairly tame by today's standards, but in 1973, the trailer was actually pulled from several theaters because people thought it was too scary to be seen. Those people were likely the ones who were carried out of the theaters by paramedics when the movie came out too. But I question, why did you go see it? And you knew you were scared by the trailer. Why would you go see the full-length film? What you thought was going to happen? That is crazy. Speaking of people who shouldn't have went to go see the movie, our next behind-the-scenes note, one sued Warner Brothers. It's quite known that The Exorcist caused people to faint, feel ill, even lose their lunch in the auditorium. But that being said, those people bought tickets to a movie and willingly went into the theater. And so any repercussions that followed shouldn't cost Warner Brothers anything, right? Well, you're wrong. While one woman passed out at a screening of The Exorcist, she passed out and broke her jaw. And so she ended up suing Warner Brothers and claimed that the subliminal messages in the film caused her injury. I don't mean to laugh at the woman. I like I said, I watched the movie several times. Didn't see a subliminal message to cause me to hurt myself. I didn't catch that. Warner Brothers is also said to have settled the dispute for undisclosed amount to avoid, going to court over the matter. So it was settled out of court. But I would have fought it. I mean, come on. You bought the ticket. You fell. You broke your jaw. I mean, it stinks, but man, how is that Warner Brothers' fault? How is that Warner Brothers' fault? Well, so is life. Anyway, our next note, the scene where Reagan vomits on Father Karras, he wasn't supposed to get hit in the face with the vomit. But he did. This was the first meeting between Reagan and Father Karras. Ellen Bernstein wasn't the only one who showed real emotion in the final cut of the film. Jason Miller, who plays Father Karras, did also. The projectile vomit scene is said to have been filmed in only one take because Jason Miller's reaction was so genuine that they didn't need another take. When the vomit launched at Father Karras, it was supposed to hit him in the chest, but instead it sprayed all over his face. The plastic tube used to shoot the vomit actually misfired, which caused it to hit him right in the face and the mouth. If you watch that scene again, it went in his mouth. Actor Jason Miller was so disgusted and really coughed and wiped vomit out of his mouth. It was, I'm telling you, it was real. It was authentic. I knew that was real. I didn't even have to read it. I knew it was real when his reaction to it was like, oh, because he got all in his mouth and everything. Oh man, that was disgusting. But anywho, this particular note, this one tripped me out because for years, like when I first saw The Exorcist, I thought Max von Sydow was 70 years old when he made that movie. Honest to God, I thought he was old as Methuselah when he made this movie. But that wasn't so. Max von Sydow went through 4 hours in the makeup chair for his role. While Linda Blair, obviously, she had to go through a long makeup application. Max von Sydow did as well. The actor, Max von Sydow, at the time of the filming, and this really hits home, he was 44 years old when this movie came out, when he made the movie. Why it hits home? Because I'm currently 44 years old. And so it blew my mind to know that he was not that old when he made this movie, but the makeup was top notch. Yet he was cast in a role that was written for somebody nearly twice his age. Makeup artist Dick Smith had to make Max von Sydow appear 40 years older than he actually was, which took 4 hours to apply the makeup. Apparently, after The Exorcist was released, Max von Sydow had a hard time finding work because movie studios thought he was too old to play many roles, even though he was only 44 years old. That's how good the makeup was. Look, if you've never seen The Exorcist, and I don't know why you're listening to this show, because I'm going to spoil it. Man, I'm going through spoiling it now. But anywho, or it's been a long time since you've seen it, go back and watch it. And look at Max von Sydow. You'll be like, man. I mean, the makeup was so good. He really looked 80. Man, that blew my mind. I thought he was older. Another note. William Friedkin wasn't the original choice to direct The Exorcist. Since the early age of cinema, there have been some incredible directors that have graced the world with their movies. You have Stanley Kubrick, who is one of those directors. And he directed films like The Shining, A Clockwork Orange, and 2001: A Space Odyssey. And so when Warner Brothers sent the script to Stanley Kubrick, he responded by saying, I only like to develop my own stuff. And so he didn't take it, but he was the original choice for The Exorcist. Now, William Peter Blankley, he fought for William Friedkin to get the job, which of course eventually happened, while Friedkin crafted one of the greatest horror movies ever made. it's hard not to wonder what The Exorcist, directed by Stanley Kubrick, would have looked like. But I think the version that we did get is amazing. So I'm not mad at it, but it is one of those what ifs, you know. The Exorcist was the first horror film to be nominated for Best Picture. The horror movies often get snubbed when it comes to the Oscar season, you know, because they're genre films. You know, just they don't take them seriously. But with that being said, a handful of horror movies have gotten Academy Awards over the years. You know, The Silence of the Lambs, uh, Get Out, you know, and The Exorcist. The Exorcist was actually the first horror film to be nominated in 1974, even though Friedkin's movie lost to The Sting that year. I think a lot of people feel that that was a snub. The Exorcist was still nominated for 10 Oscars. But The Sting is a classic. The Sting is a real good film. But I think if you go back now with, you know, hindsight, it probably would have gave it to The Exorcist. You know, the movie did win 2 of those nominations, Best Writing and Best Sound. But let's be real, people. Linda Blair clearly should have won her Oscar nomination. I mean, hands down. She should have won. Another hands down I was hinting to earlier. Dick Smith should have won for best makeup. His makeup was so good, Max Van Sydow couldn't get a job afterwards. I mean, come on, man. Yeah, it should have. Like I said, hindsight, as well as Ellen Burstyn. Yeah, I believe she should have won. Excellent performance, even though she was really hurt in her scene. Speaking of which, Ellen Burstyn wasn't the first choice to play Reagan's mother. The role almost went to Audrey Hepburn and Jane Fonda. They were in heavy consideration. Audrey Hepburn, she actually wanted the role, but she did not want to come to the United States and film it. She wanted them to come to, I think she was staying in France and film her scenes. So they couldn't do that. So she didn't get the role. But I'm kind of glad, and I love Audrey Hepburn. But I can't see William Friedkin yanking her to the ground, you know, and slapping her in the face. I mean, that's Audrey Hepburn. He probably would have been killed. That's Hollywood royalty. I mean, come on, man. That wasn't going to work out. Speaking of actors who almost had roles in the film, Linda Blair, who played the role excellent, almost was not cast. It almost went to another screen queen who a few years later stepped on the scene and became a part of her own horror franchise in Halloween, and that is none other than Jamie Lee Curtis, who was 13 at the time, and she was asked to audition for The Exorcist, but her mother said no. And her mother is, of course, another horror actress, icon, Janet Leigh, who was in such films as Psycho and so on and so forth. Apparently, horror does run in the family, but not this particular horror film. For Janet Leigh, she was not going to have her daughter masturbating to a cross and spitting up pea soup on priests. So I feel her on that note. Other casting considerations: Marlon Brando and Jack Nicholson were considered for the roles of the priest. Several famous actors passed up when it came to the role of Reagan and the mother, but even more famous people were considered for the roles of the priest. Father Karras, who was played by Jason Miller, was almost played by Jack Nicholson or Gene Hackman, but it ultimately went to Miller. As far as the role of Father Marilyn, Marlon Brando was considered for the character. Brando was well known by 1973, especially after starring in The Godfather. But William Friedkin wouldn't let Warner Brothers hire him since the movie would turn into a Brando film, which he did not want. And so the role ultimately went to Max Van Sydow. Now, my last note of a behind the scenes, I don't know what you would call this, but this is about as real can get. There was an actual real life murderer in the movie who had a role in the movie. Uh, in the scene, not a big role, but in the scene when Reagan goes to the doctor to get that procedure done, medical procedure done, one of the assistants, medical assistants who was helping her, it is a man named Paul Basin. Paul Basin murdered somebody in 1977. In actual murder, he went to prison and everything. And it's just crazy how this film has affected so many people, from the tippy top, even the small, minuscule people who was on set. I mean, everybody was affected by this film, and it's crazy. Either you died, you got hurt, or you went to prison. It's it's insane that this movie turned out the way that it did, despite all that transpired during the making of this film. But enough about the making. Let's get to the film. Let's review the 1973 classic horror supernatural classic, directed by William Friedkin, written by William Peter Blatty, based on his novel from 1971 of the same name, starring Linda Blair, Ellen Bernstein, Max Van Sydow, and Jason Miller, none other than The Exorcist. And the story of The Exorcist follows the demonic possession of a young girl and her mother's attempt to rescue her through an exorcism by two Catholic priests. The Exorcist will go down as probably one of the greatest horror movies of all time. I know a lot of people consider it the greatest horror movie of all time. I look at it more as a psychological thriller. Yes, it has horror elements in it, but I don't look at this as a horror film. Is it scary? Yeah, I mean, you wouldn't be human if it didn't scare you. If this movie didn't bother you or make you uncomfortable in any way. This was truly a disturbing film. And what made it so disturbing was the way this movie was filmed, the way this movie was structured. It didn't feel like a movie. It felt like a not a documentary, but like a reenactment. You know what I'm saying? It felt like a one of those like unsolved mystery reenactment videos just stretched out for 2 hours. That's what it felt like. It just felt real and authentic, and that within itself is frightening as I don't know what, because you have this young girl who is being, I mean, just tortured from the inside out by this demonic presence. And this film also plays on your beliefs, on your faith. And that's why I'm confused when people talk about how this is a demonic film. This is a film that, you know, hypes up Satan and all this. I don't see that. Now, is this a film to get you to join the Catholic Church? No. This ain't even a film to get you to join any church. You know, this doesn't do that. It's not, it really does a, dare I say, good job of straddling the fence, you know, whether you're a skeptic or a believer. It really does a good job of playing both sides and making sense of everything that is taking place to this young girl. You know, because the mother, played beautifully by Ellen Bernstein, who's going to be in the Exorcist Believer that's coming out, returning in the same role 50 years later. That's crazy. But her character, the mother, has exhausted every resource possible to find out what's wrong with her daughter. Why all of a sudden her daughter changed? Is it something mental? She takes her to a psychiatrist. She takes her to a hypnotist. She takes her to the doctors, neurologic doctors, and all this other. I mean, she tried everything, and finally, the last resort. Hey, won't you try Jesus? And so, you know, so that's how it go. But I think this movie did a good job of establishing the mother-daughter relationship as well, as quickly as they did, because this movie isn't long. You know, it felt like it was gonna be long at the beginning, like this was gonna be one of those long, dragged out, epically long films, but it wasn't. It was 2 hours. You know, it was 122 minutes, at least the theatrical cut. Now the director's cut is 132 minutes. It's an extra 10 minutes to it, but this it actually flew by. This movie flies by. It doesn't feel long. Nothing drags. This movie really hits the pedal, man. I mean, this was fast paced for a talkie. This is no action in it. There's no chasing in it. There's no whippy dialogue all the way through it. This is just a talkie, dialogue driven psychological thriller. And I was on the edge of my seat every time I watched this movie. I don't care if it was back in 1980, whenever, or 2023. You know, I got the same feeling the other day when I watched it as I did when I watched it years back. And this relationship, as I was saying before, between Linda Blair and Ellen Bernstein, and you see how they are before, how they truly are a mother and daughter. Yeah, I believed that they were mother and daughter, you know, and when the change happens and it flips, and the reaction from Ellen Bernstein is like, that's a mother. That is truly a mother who doesn't know what to do, sees her daughter going through this, and you want to relieve her of this pain and everything, but you can't. There's nothing you can do. You spent all this money. You went to all these doctors, and nothing is working. And it is soul crushing to see her disintegrate as you watch Reagan's character disintegrate on that bed, you know, figuratively and literally, you know, the skin being ripped off of her face and all this other stuff. You see emotionally her mother going through the same type of decay, and it's soul crushing. My favorite character in this film is Father Karras, who is portrayed by Jason Miller. And I love his character because he's a priest who lost his faith. Now, we see that a lot in movies now. You know, I mean, throw a rock at a movie that has a priest in it, and 9 times out of 10, he has a lapse in faith, you know. But the way that Jason Miller portrays this character is very interesting because he looks at being a priest as a job. He doesn't look at it as a calling. This is just a job to him, you know, and he's gotten to the point where he doesn't want to do it anymore. He don't want to do it anymore. And he has the little subplot with his mother, and she's old and she needs help, and he doesn't like to leave her alone, and he leaves her alone and she dies. And he's driven by this guilt, you know, this guilt is eating him up from the inside out, you know. And the demon later on in the film, when they, you know, meet up, when he meets up with Reagan, should I say, is playing on that with him. And it's like, oh man, this is brutal, man. This is torture on different all forms of levels. You know what I'm saying? But boy, I love that. I love the acting here. Uh, Max Van Sydow. I said it earlier when we was talking about how he was only 44 years old when he made this movie, but he looked like he was 84 years old. He I can see why studios didn't want to hire him because he looked 84 and he act 84. Now he isn't in this movie a lot. He's in the very beginning and he's at the very end, but it feels like his movie. It feels like he's the hero of this story. But we know if we see the movie, he's not. You know what I'm saying? But one of the things that really stuck out to me when I watched it a couple of days ago, and honest to God, I never noticed this until I watched it this last time. I'm glad I watched it this last time because in my mind, I thought the whole movie did this certain thing, but it didn't. The thing that blew my mind, the iconic score, dun, 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 the Exorcist theme. You only hear it one time in this entire movie, and it's like a throwaway little scene that has nothing to do with the Exorcist. It was a scene when Ellen Burstyn's character is walking down the street. You hear the theme, but you don't hear it no other time in the movie. And for some strange reason, I think it's the Mandela effect or something, I thought that theme played throughout the whole movie, but it didn't. You didn't hear it, but it's so iconic. I just thought that was crazy, and then thought that was crazy. I'm pretty sure all of you know that who've seen the movie, but look, bear with me. I'm a slow fella, I never proclaimed to be a genius on this show. But anyways, yeah, that stuck out to me last time. I wanna mention the direction here, how this movie is directed beautifully, but I feel kind of bad saying that because I know what happened behind the scenes with William Friedkin. But I mean, the movie did turn out awesome. It was awesomely directed, even though the man was crazy. God rest his soul. Like I said, he passed away a couple of months ago at the age of 87 years old. But I love the direction here. Like I said, it feels so authentic. It feels so real to say this is based on loosely based on a true story. If I felt that to my core, it feels real, and that's why this film scares the bejesus out of a lot of people. This is such a well-made film. The cinematography by Owen Rosman is excellent. The movie's 50 years old, and you can see that it's 50 years old, but at the same time, it really don't feel 50 years. The only thing that makes this movie feel 50 years old is in certain scenes where you see the cars. You know what I'm saying? You see certain cars, the style of vehicles that was around that time. But it doesn't feel 70s to me. It don't feel dated in that sense. But going back to the acting, I want to give a special shout out to Linda Blair for her performance in this movie. She went through a lot. She had to do so much and carry this film at a young age. This type of film, to go from this sweet, innocent little 12-year-old girl to the most evil, vile being you've ever seen in person or on the big screen, is like, boom, mind blowing. I mean, there are grown, seasoned, veteran actors who can't pull off what she did at that young age. It is still amazing to me that Linda Blair never had this big career that, following this movie. You know what I'm saying? Now, she worked, of course. She still worked But I mean, I thought she was gonna shoot off to the moon. I mean, not back then, I wasn't born then. But after I saw it, I'm like, man, why I never see Linda Blair in anything else? I thought she would be in much more movies, feature films. After that performance, because that is a lot. That is a lot that she had to pull off, and she did it perfectly. She went toe to toe with everybody in this movie and owned it. I love it. I love everything about this movie. Yeah, there are a couple of nitpicks that I have with it. You know, the the sense of time span that goes throughout this film, I have no idea how long this movie took. Now, yeah, I know the movie is 2 hours long, but I mean like the time frame of this movie, because we jump like weeks, and we don't know we jump weeks until they mention that was a week ago or something like that. You know what I'm saying? It's like, and you don't find that out until that scene is almost over. And so, because I'm kind of thinking that, the way the film is edited, it's like quick cuts, and which kind of was a little distracting at times. But the sense of time was my biggest flaw. I was like, man, how far along are we here? Like we see Max Van Sydow at the beginning of the film. He's in Iraq on this dig. And then, I don't know, maybe about a half an hour later in the film, like, oh yeah, he been left there about years ago. Or months ago he returned. I'm like, what? And then, it's like, you kind of get lost in the time vortex in the film. So that it kind of threw me off. But that's my only flaw. But other than that, this film is awesome. This is truly one of the greatest horror films of all time. Even though I do consider it a psychological thriller, it is an amazing achievement in film. The Exorcist from 1973, on its 50th anniversary, gets a letter grade of an A. Amazing horror film, amazing film. And I think that this movie got a bad rap back then. I think it gets a bad rap even still for a lot of people who refuse to watch it. When I was rewatching it a couple of days ago, and my wife came my wife came home, and she walked through the door, and she's like, "Oh no, this is The Exorcist." She kept it pushing. Um, you know, I get it, but look. If I let evil spirits in this house, I apologize to my wife, but I doubt it. The only evil spirit in this house is mine, and I've been here for 20 years since we bought this house, and nothing happened yet. So fingers crossed. But anywho, yeah, this is the 50-year anniversary. It's crazy to say 50. You know, I wish I could say, oh, I remember when. No, I don't. I wasn't there. I wasn't even thought about when this movie was made. But I am glad that film is such a time capsule to whereas we can go back and watch these classics from even before we were born. So glad that I got to witness The Exorcist in whatever form I can get it. The Exorcist was made for $12 million. It went on to gross $428 million worldwide. Now I don't know if that was adjusted for inflation or not, but yet and still is that's an amazing achievement for a horror film. And so kudos to them. I mentioned earlier this film was nominated for Best Picture along with 9 other Oscars, and it won for Best Adapted Screenplay with which went to William Peter Blatty, and for Best Sound for the sound engineers in this film. And that was another flaw I had. I don't know if it's the version I was watching. Like sometimes the sound kind of drained out. I don't know if that was on purpose to kind of take the sound out of it, and then the sound will go back up. I guess that was the purpose of certain scenes. But certain scenes really didn't have the scare effect. It was just in scenes where they were talking, and after they finished talking, it could be my surround sound system. I don't know. That's why I didn't knock it for it. But in any event, it must be my system because it won for best sound. So the sound couldn't have been that bad. But this film is in the Library of Congress for preservation for its cultural and historical impact. So I can honestly say this is a certified classic film, The Exorcist. And so, everybody, I would like to know, have you ever seen The Exorcist? Were you like me as a child, banned from watching The Exorcist, and you broke that ban without your parents knowing, like I do? And I'm pretty sure my mom know now because she listens to this show. I'd like to know. Email the show, kbradiopodcast@gmail.com. You can also look us up on all social media platforms. Just look up the KB Radio Network. Also look up the KB Radio Network channel on YouTube. Subscribe and like this video if you don't mind. Don't forget about the 5 stars, the reviews, and sharing this show. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, wherever you are currently listening to movie goodness here on the KB Radio Network. Everybody, thank you for joining me as we discuss the behind the scenes and the review of the 50th anniversary of the horror classic, The Exorcist. Can't wait to speak to you again as we continue throughout the month of October, our horror Halloween expiration, I guess you could say. We're going to get spooky all October this year as we gear up for Halloween. As always, everybody, I want you all to know that I love you. Continue to love everyone. And until we speak again, you all be blessed.